Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
It started with a photo, grainy, overly filtered, clearly taken by someone who thought tropical drinks and coordinated outfits made up for rotten character. I was in the middle of folding laundry, mismatched socks clinging to each other like they had a better family bond than I did, when I opened Instagram out of habit. There it was. My family, all of them. My mom, my dad, my younger brother Tyler, and his wife Jenna, standing on the deck of a cruise ship, wind in their hair, plastic leis around their necks, grinning like they'd just won the damn lottery. The caption under it was what hit me first: "Family time is the best time." I stared at it for a moment, not even fully processing. At first, I thought maybe it was an old photo. Maybe they just posted something from years ago and tried to make it cute. But then I looked closer. Jenna's hair was newly short, a cut I remembered her showing off at Thanksgiving just 2 months ago. Tyler was wearing the same smartwatch he got for Christmas. My parents looked older, tired, but smiling. And I was nowhere. Not in the frame. Not in the caption. Not in the damn family. It took me 10 full minutes to breathe normally again. I wasn't even angry yet, just stunned. There had been no mention of a trip. No casual, "Oh, we're thinking of going somewhere." No, "Do you want to come?" Not even a lie. Just nothing. Silence. Absence. The kind of absence that tells you it was deliberate. I didn't even hesitate. I picked up the phone and called my mother, and she picked up like nothing was wrong, as if she hadn't just yanked the floor out from under me. "Oh, honey," she said in that voice, soft, vaguely apologetic, like she was already preparing to cast herself as the victim in whatever came next. "I meant to call you before we left. Things got so busy, I thought maybe Tyler had mentioned it." I asked her flat out why no one had told me. And that's when she dropped the line that would sit with me like rot in the pit of my stomach for days. "We thought you knew. It was just easier this way." Tyler wanted a drama-free trip. A drama-free trip. Let that settle in for a second. A cruise that included everyone, my parents, my brother, his wife, but excluded me because he wanted peace. And I was, what, the chaos? The black sheep? The family volcano that needed avoiding? I didn't say anything. Not right away. I just sat there, my heart trying to push its way out of my ribcage, every memory of Christmas dinners and birthday calls and emergency babysitting and loaned money and tearful late-night talks smashing against the sudden realization that none of it meant anything. I wasn't even mad yet. That came later. First came shame. And the ugly kind, not the kind you earn, but the kind you inherit from being made to feel like you were always just too much. I hung up. She texted me 3 minutes later, "Please don't make this a big thing. It's just one trip. We'll plan something together soon." I didn't respond. What the hell do you say to that? How do you explain to your own mother that it's not just one trip, it's the truth about how they see you? About what you are to them? The silence in my apartment felt louder than the ocean must have sounded on that ship. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, thinking. And then I opened my laptop. It wasn't out of spite. Not yet. It was more curiosity, like checking to see if the gun in the drawer is still loaded. I logged into my Verizon account. I hadn't looked at it in months. Maybe years. Ever since I set up the family plan 5 years ago, I'd just let it run. Automatic payments. Easy. Back when Tyler was out of work and needed a little help. Back when I was still the fixer in the family, the one who always said yes first and cried about it later. And there it was. Tyler's number. Still active. Still part of my plan. I checked the usage details. He'd been using international roaming. Probably hadn't even considered who was paying for it. I clicked over to my Capital One dashboard. Another relic of the past. Back when Tyler had terrible credit and couldn't get approved for anything without someone co-signing. I had offered, my mistake. He had a card with a small limit, just enough to get back on his feet, and I'd forgotten it even existed until now. Until I saw the pending cruise charges. Hundreds of dollars. Not massive, but enough to burn. Enough to make it real. Suddenly, my curiosity turned cold and sharp. I wasn't even angry at Tyler, not really. He'd always been who he was: selfish, manipulative, too charming for his own good. What hurt worse was that my parents, my own mother, had agreed. had gone along with it, had chosen peace for him and exclusion for me. The version of Rachel that existed 5 years ago would have cried for a week and sent everyone long, emotional texts trying to explain how hurt she was. But the version sitting here tonight, staring at these financial accounts and cruise selfies, had been through a little too much life to beg for a seat at the table anymore. I hovered over the suspend line option on the phone plan. My hands didn't even shake. One click and the line would go dead. Tyler wouldn't have service for the rest of his drama-free vacation. One more click on the bank site, and the card would be frozen. Let Jenna pay for the poolside cocktails. Let my parents feel the inconvenience of leaving me behind. And maybe the cruelest part? I didn't feel bad about it. Not yet. I clicked. Both actions. Done. No going back. Then I turned my phone off, poured a fresh glass of wine, and waited. Not for apologies. Not for explanations. I waited for the cracks to show in the perfect cruise photos. And I promised myself one thing: I wouldn't respond. Not until they learned that removing someone from the family comes with consequences. Because if I'm the drama, I can play that role better than any of them. I didn't sleep much that night, though I wasn't crying or screaming or pacing like someone broken down. I just laid there in bed, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, my hands folded on my stomach, feeling the way a house must feel right after the last guest has left. Silent, dim, stripped of noise, but echoing with the memory of it. It wasn't grief that kept me awake, it was clarity. The kind of clarity that burns through all the little lies you've believed for years. The clarity that comes when the people you've spent your whole life defending finally make it obvious that they were never defending you. By morning, I had reread the message from my mother a dozen times. Please don't make this a big thing. It's just one trip. And even though I knew she believed that, even though I could hear her saying it in that tired, patient tone she used when Tyler screwed something up, but she didn't want to face it, I also knew exactly what she was doing. She was minimizing the fallout before it started. She was controlling the narrative, painting me as the unreasonable one before I even had a chance to respond. It wasn't just one trip. It was an erasure. A surgical removal. I wasn't accidentally left out. I was cut off, cleanly and deliberately, in favor of their precious peace. And I was expected to take it quietly, to disappear with dignity, and to somehow still send Christmas cards in December. I went back into my Verizon account before breakfast. I sat there with my coffee going cold beside me as I stared at the billing history, scrolling backward month after month, year after year, realizing that I had paid thousands of dollars over time not just for my own line, but for Tyler's as well. This same Tyler who now had the audacity to request a family vacation without my energy. I scrolled through the call logs and saw hundreds of minutes used, some of them long overseas calls, some of them in the middle of the night, all while I never got so much as a text from him asking how I was doing or if I needed anything. I had been footing the bill for a brother who thought I was disposable, for a man who smiled in family photos while holding the phone I paid for. The credit card statement was worse. Back in the summer of 2018, after one of Tyler's bad months, I had added him as an authorized user on a card I rarely used, just to give him a little room to breathe, as he'd called it. He'd promised to pay me back, to use it for emergencies only, and I, like the idiot older sister desperate to keep everyone afloat, had believed him. At first it was gas, groceries, an occasional Uber, but then came the hotel bookings, the bar tabs, the Spotify subscriptions, the monthly charges that said massage therapy, but somehow never lined up with any known medical issue. I confronted him once, a year after the card hit its limit, and he swore he'd figure something out, then ghosted the subject entirely. Eventually, I paid it down myself and forgot about it, until now, when I saw a string of charges from the cruise ship's onboard purchases, luxury spa, gift shop, formal dining upgrade, all billed to the card under my name. It's one thing to be forgotten. It's another thing entirely to be used. I sat there in the quiet of my apartment, surrounded by the ordinary chaos of a Tuesday morning, the laundry I still hadn't folded, the grocery list stuck to the fridge with a magnet from a vacation I'd taken alone, the muted sound of my neighbor's dog barking down the hall, and I felt a kind of still rage building in my chest, Not hot and explosive, but cold and focused, like a knife being sharpened slowly. I had given them everything over the years: rides to the airport, bailouts from late rent, emotional labor they never once acknowledged, holidays hosted at my place because I had the nice kitchen, babysitting for their friends' kids even though I never had children of my own, and they repaid me with silence and deletion. They chose ease over honesty, comfort over inclusion, Tyler over me. And I was supposed to be the bigger person, as always, swallowing the insult and keeping the peace, because that's what good daughters do. But I wasn't going to be the good daughter anymore. I didn't respond to any of the messages that started rolling in that afternoon. Jenna, of course, was the first, with her soft tone, faux friendliness masked as concern. "Hey girl, weird question, but did something happen to the phone plan? We're having trouble making calls, huh?" That fake little "huh" at the end, like it was just a glitch, a funny inconvenience, like I'd somehow forgotten to pay a bill rather than made a choice. She followed it up with a "phew" and a sad face reaction to her own message, as if the guilt of her emoji could soften what they'd done. Then came my mother's email. Long, meandering, full of soft-spoken cruelty disguised as concern. "Rachel, I really don't know what's going on, but this kind of reaction isn't helping anyone. We never meant to hurt you. You're taking this too personally. I hope you'll come around and we can talk this through like adults." Talk it through? Like adults? I laughed out loud, a short, joyless sound, because it hit me then. She genuinely believed they were the victims in this story. In her mind, I was overreacting. I had always been sensitive, intense, too emotional. Tyler had always been the easy one, the charming one, the golden boy with the messy room and the million excuses. I was the one who caused tension because I refused to let things slide, because I asked hard questions, because I remembered every time someone lied or twisted the truth. I was the one who ruined holidays by asking why Tyler hadn't paid back that loan, why Dad never admitted what he said behind Mom's back, why everyone acted like silence was the same thing as peace. But now, for once, I wasn't asking questions. I was making statements. No explanations. No long texts. No emotional essays trying to make them see. I had suspended Tyler's phone line. I had frozen the card. I had stopped paying for the tools they used to ignore me. And I wasn't going to explain a damn thing. I knew this wouldn't end here. I knew they'd come back louder now, angrier, trying to reframe this as my tantrum rather than their betrayal. I knew guilt was coming next. But for now, in this moment, with the emails piling up and the group chat going silent and the cruise ship floating somewhere far away, I sat still in my apartment and smiled, not out of joy, but out of understanding. They didn't forget me. They chose not to include me. And now I was making my own choices, too. By the time the third day of the cruise rolled around, I had expected silence to be the loudest thing in my world, but I underestimated just how quickly silence becomes sirens when people begin to lose access to the things they take for granted. Not just conveniences, not just little comforts, but the systems that allow them to pretend they're not dependent on someone they claim to want distance from. The messages started coming in like slow drops from a leaky faucet, first a trickle of confusion, then a stream of increasingly frantic attempts at communication that betrayed just how deep their reliance on me had gone, even when they worked so hard to make me feel irrelevant. At exactly 8:27 in the morning, my inbox lit up with a message from a number I didn't recognize, but which I knew belonged to Jenna, because I remembered once helping her set up her voicemail when she joined the family plan years ago. When she and Tyler were still living in that dingy third-floor apartment with the broken window unit and the shared bathroom they never cleaned. The message was short and disingenuously casual, a hollow attempt at lightness meant to camouflage the rising panic beneath it. "Hey Rachel, sorry to bother you, but we're having some trouble with the phones out here. Not sure if it's a roaming thing or something else. Let me know if you see anything weird on your end." And then, almost as an afterthought, she added a second message a few minutes later. Not urgent, just kinda inconvenient. "Hope everything's okay back home." That was the first crack in their polished little vacation fantasy, the first sign that reality had finally caught up with them. I didn't respond. I didn't even open the messages fully, because I knew that nothing I said would matter as much as what I wasn't saying. The silence was the message. The disconnection was the response. They had gone to great lengths to orchestrate a vacation that excluded the drama, to remove me from the dynamic because I dared to speak when something didn't feel right, because I asked questions instead of playing along. And now they were discovering that you don't get to pick and choose which parts of a person's presence you benefit from while conveniently discarding the rest. By noon, my mother had found a Wi-Fi signal strong enough to send an email that began, predictably, with a line that sounded like it had been pulled from a parenting handbook circa 1985. "Rachel, we really need to talk about what's going on." She continued in her usual soft confrontational tone, the kind that wraps guilt in cotton balls and pretends it's concern. "This isn't like you. I'm worried. We're worried." Tyler said he noticed something strange with his phone, and Jenna can't make any calls. "We're in a foreign country and we can't reach anyone." "This isn't funny, Rachel. We didn't mean to hurt you. We just needed a peaceful trip, and now you're making things harder for everyone." And that's when the anger finally arrived, not loud or wild, not the kind of rage that needs to break things or shout, but the deep, clean anger of someone who has finally seen enough, who no longer doubts herself, who has stopped asking for people to understand and started requiring that they face what they've done. I read the email once, then again, and with each sentence I could feel the weight of their entitlement pressing against the truth, that they had planned this entire trip, coordinated every detail, packed their bags, made their memories. And all along they knew I wouldn't be there, and they were fine with that. In fact, they preferred it that way. Until the inconvenience began. Because let's be honest, that's what I was to them: convenience. A line on a phone plan. A second name on a credit card. A holiday host. A dependable fallback. A financial safety net wrapped in a woman's body. They didn't want me there emotionally, but they had no issue keeping me tethered logistically. That was the final betrayal, not just being left out, but being used at the same time. I poured myself another cup of coffee, ignored the pit forming in my stomach, and opened my voice memos app. I wasn't entirely sure why I was recording, but something told me I'd want this moment preserved, this moment of absolute, unapologetic clarity. I spoke quietly into the phone, my voice steady and calm. It's amazing how fast people remember your value when you stop giving it to them for free. Let them sweat. Let them feel what silence really is. Then I saved the file, titled it simply Day 3, and put the phone face down on the table. By late afternoon, the texts had changed tone. Jenna's bubbly questions had stopped, replaced by a single terse message from Tyler, sent from what appeared to be a borrowed number or some shipboard messaging service. "I know you shut off the phones. This is petty, Rachel. Grow up." There was no greeting, no question, no attempt at understanding, just accusation, the same pattern I'd seen all my life whenever someone dared to hold him accountable. The implication was clear. I was the problem. I was the unreasonable one. I was the one making waves. I didn't respond. I didn't even flinch. I imagined them sitting on that boat, staring at their useless devices, trying to check into dinner reservations or order drinks or look up some tourist trap map while their screens flashed error messages and connection failures. I imagined Jenna snapping at Tyler, blaming him for not fixing it, Tyler shrugging and saying it was my fault, my mother trying to play peacemaker while also quietly seething that her perfect cruise had been tainted by my reaction, and my father saying nothing, as always, letting the tension swirl around him like he wasn't part of it. And in that imagined scene, for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel guilty. I felt whole. Not powerful, not vindictive, just rooted. Like I had finally stepped into my own corner, stopped trying to belong where I was never welcome, stopped begging for inclusion that came with a price tag. I knew they'd escalate. I knew they'd come home and bring with them new tactics, tears, lectures, family group meetings designed to clear the air while never once admitting fault, but I also knew I had changed something fundamental, something they couldn't unsee. I had reminded them that silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's intention. Sometimes it's a boundary. And sometimes it's revenge in its quietest, cleanest form. So I turned off my notifications, shut my laptop, and stepped out onto my balcony with a book I wouldn't read and a drink I didn't need, just to let the wind hit my face while I thought, not about what they were doing, but about how far I'd come. Because for once, they were the ones stuck, lost, confused, and reaching out into the void. And I was finally the one choosing not to answer. The silence didn't last forever, not because I broke it, but because people like my family don't know how to live inside a consequence without immediately trying to rearrange it into something they can manage, control, or deny. They came back from their cruise just as I knew they would, tan and polished on the surface, but already beginning to crack beneath the weight of unspoken truths and collective guilt they refused to name. I didn't expect an apology right away. I didn't even expect decency. What I expected, and what I received almost to the minute, was a carefully curated cocktail of guilt-tripping, gaslighting, and emotional baiting wrapped in just enough false concern to make themselves feel noble in the story they'd already begun rewriting. It was a Sunday afternoon, gray and muggy outside, the kind of day that clings to your skin and makes the walls feel closer than they are, when my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I hadn't spoken to any of them since I cut the lines, hadn't answered a single message, hadn't engaged with any of the awkward outreach attempts or manipulative pity bombs that had landed in my inbox like emotional grenades disguised as confessions, and I certainly hadn't invited anyone over. But when I looked through the peephole and saw my mother standing there with a loaf of banana bread wrapped in plastic and an expression halfway between worry and self-congratulation, I knew immediately what this visit was meant to be. She stood there with her shoulders hunched like she'd been practicing a posture of humility in the mirror before coming over. Her face carefully set in the kind of neutral sorrow people wear when they want you to believe they've been thinking deeply about your pain, but somehow still center their own feelings inside it. I didn't open the door. I didn't say a word. I just watched her as she waited, checked her phone, knocked again, and then, after a few moments of visible discomfort, gently placed the loaf of bread on the doormat as if laying an offering at the feet of someone they couldn't quite bring themselves to understand. I let her walk away. I let the bread sit there for 2 days until it began to harden, until even the birds outside stopped circling it like they knew something rotten lived inside things that pretend to be sweet. Later that evening, a voicemail came from my father, which in itself was rare enough to give me pause, since he typically avoided direct contact unless it was about something transactional, tax documents, car repairs, or asking me if I could help your mother out with the tech stuff again. But this voicemail was different. He sounded tired, not just physically, but emotionally, the way a man sounds when he's realized, far too late, that his silence had weight and that weight finally landed somewhere permanent. He said my name 3 times in the first 10 seconds, like repetition might soften it, and then launched into a speech that wasn't quite an apology, but wanted to be received as one. "Rachel," he said, "we didn't handle that right. I know that now. Your mother and I, we just wanted a calm trip. Things have been so tense lately and Tyler said he needed space, and I guess we thought giving it to him would help things overall. We didn't want you to feel excluded. I swear we didn't. But now, seeing how you've reacted, seeing how hurt you are, it's clear we made a mistake. Maybe we can talk soon. Just talk. Clear the air." It would have been a moving message, maybe even effective, if I hadn't lived my entire life listening to the sound of him saying nothing while everything happened around him. He was always the peacemaker, which in our family just meant the one who stood quietly while others set things on fire, then came in later with a bucket and asked why the room was wet. But what caught me off guard wasn't the voicemail, or the bread, or the fact that they'd started to realize what it meant to remove someone they depended on. It was Tyler's message, which arrived in a way I hadn't expected. It was a voicemail too, but it came from a new number, likely a burner or a temporary SIM card, because his tone had none of the familiarity or warmth that used to be present in our sibling conversations. He began casually, too casually, like he was trying to pretend we'd just had a minor disagreement and not a deliberate betrayal. "Hey Rach," he said, and the sound of that nickname made my jaw clench with an anger so old it felt fossilized. "Listen, we should talk. This whole phone thing, kinda over the top, don't you think? I mean, come on. It was one vacation. You didn't have to blow everything up over one decision. We just needed a little peace, and instead you made everything a mess." That was the moment I knew he hadn't learned anything. Not one thing. Because for him, the crime wasn't what they did, it was that I reacted to it. His problem wasn't that they excluded me, it was that I refused to sit quietly while they did it. I sat with that voicemail for a long time, letting it ring in my ears like the tail end of a fire alarm that won't shut off. I thought about every moment that led to it, the years of covering for his irresponsibility, the loans he never repaid, the job I helped him get that he quit 2 months later without telling me, the nights I drove Jenna home when they'd had one of their dramatic door-slamming fights and he didn't want to face her, and all the countless little ways I had held him up without asking for anything in return except the decency of being treated like family. And this was what it all came down to. It was one vacation. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I opened my phone, scrolled through my voice memos, and found the one I had recorded the week before, the one I hadn't known I'd need until now. It was short. Just under 10 seconds. In it, my mother's voice said, clearly and without irony, "You know, you're so generous with your brother. You're basically the glue in this family." I texted the audio file into the family group chat. I didn't preface it. I didn't follow it with words. I just sent it, watched the delivered notification appear next to each name, and then closed the app. Silence again, but this time it was theirs. It didn't take long after that for Tyler to text again, this time with a new kind of tone, sharper, performatively contrite, laced with the thin patience of someone who doesn't like being ignored. "Fine. Let's talk," he wrote. "No parents. Just us." I stared at the message for a full minute, letting the weight of it settle. Then I typed back, simply, "You want a drama-free conversation? Let's go." Because I had one more thing to say, and this time, I wasn't going to say it through favors, or phone plans, or frozen credit cards. This time, I would say it with my voice, face to face. This time, he would have to hear me. There's something unusually still about the air on the day you decide to confront someone not out of hope for change, not in search of closure, but simply to carve out space for the truth to stand bare and unchallenged between you. A kind of emotional silence that isn't peaceful, not really, but is so deliberate and grounded that even your pulse seems to slow to match the weight of the moment. I met Tyler at a diner on the edge of town, one of those places with sticky menus and sun-faded booth seats, the kind of setting that should have made the moment feel smaller than it was, but instead somehow made it more intimate, more raw, as if truth always belonged somewhere unassuming. He was already sitting when I walked in, sipping from a chipped mug, tapping his fingers against the side of his phone in a way that told me he'd already decided how he wanted this to go: smooth, controlled. A conversation with bookends and no real accountability. I saw him before he saw me, his jaw set with a kind of casual irritation, like he was the one doing me a favor by being here, and I felt that familiar pulse of resentment in my chest, the kind I had spent most of my life swallowing in the name of family. But not this time. I sat down across from him without a greeting, without any small talk, and for a few long seconds we just stared at each other, him waiting for me to blink first, me waiting to see if he would try to lie before I gave him a chance to speak. Eventually, when the silence grew too uncomfortable for even his ego to sit with, he leaned forward and said, in a tone that tried hard to sound measured, but couldn't quite hide the condescension beneath it, "Look, I get that you're upset. I get that this whole cruise thing caught you off guard. But Rachel, you've got to see how over-the-top your reaction's been. You cut off my phone, froze the card, ignored everyone for a week, and for what? Because you didn't get invited to one trip." I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I watched his face, the slight twitch in his mouth when I didn't immediately offer him the absolution he was used to receiving, the way his hand twitched like he might reach for his phone, as if the right text or distraction might allow him to pivot the conversation into safer waters. But I didn't let him. I leaned forward, my voice steady, not loud, not angry, just clear in a way I hadn't ever spoken to him before, and I said, "It wasn't one trip, Tyler. It was every decision you've made that told me I didn't matter unless I was paying for something, fixing something, or staying silent. It was the way you've built an entire relationship with me based on convenience and entitlement, and then had the nerve to call me the problem when I finally said no." He rolled his eyes then, a gesture so dismissive I could have laughed at how predictable he still was, even now, when everything had already crumbled between us. "You're always so dramatic," he muttered, shaking his head like he couldn't quite believe he had to sit through this. "Stop calling me that," I snapped, and this time my voice did rise, not in a scream, but with the sharp edge of someone who's finally done pretending to be the bigger person just to keep peace. That was never mutual. "You don't get to use that word anymore. Dramatic is what people say when they want to ignore how much damage they've done. Dramatic is a word you use to silence someone who's finally telling the truth." "You think I overreacted?" "I underreacted for years." He looked at me then with something that might have been surprise, or maybe just discomfort, because I wasn't giving him the performance he expected. I wasn't crying, I wasn't begging, and most importantly, I wasn't backing down. I could see the cracks starting to form, the realization that I had finally severed something he never thought I would. But even then, even when faced with the cost of his own actions, Tyler couldn't help himself. He leaned back, arms crossed, and asked with that smirk I'd seen 100 times before, "So what now? You're just going to cut me out completely? Over a vacation?" And that was when I knew for certain that this conversation wasn't about resolution, and never would be. I looked at him and said, with more calm than I expected to feel, "I didn't just cut you out over a vacation, Tyler. I cut you out because you showed me exactly how you see me, optional, disposable, and only useful when I'm quiet and generous. So yes, I removed you from my phone plan. I froze the card. But more than that, I took back every piece of power I ever gave you. I'm not your safety net anymore. I'm not your emotional trash can. I'm not your silent investor in the illusion that we're close. You wanted a drama-free life? Congratulations. You now have a Rachel-free one." He didn't respond right away. He blinked, shifted in his seat, looked around the diner like maybe someone would step in and declare him the winner of the exchange, but no one did. The waitress came by, dropped the check between us, and walked away without making eye contact, like she could feel the weight of what had just passed between us, but knew better than to touch it. I reached into my purse, pulled out a 20, and dropped it on the table, not for him, not even for the coffee, but for myself, a full-circle moment of paying for something one last time and then never again. When I stood to leave, he called after me, "So that's it. You're just done." I turned to him once more, just briefly, and I said, "No, Tyler. You were done the moment you decided peace meant pretending I didn't exist. I'm just finally choosing to believe you." And with that, I walked out of the diner, not triumphant, not vindicated, just done. Later that evening, I sat on my couch with the lights off and a quiet playlist humming softly in the background, my phone face down on the coffee table, buzzing every few hours with new messages I had no intention of reading. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel hollow either. I felt clean. Like someone who had finally finished unpacking a truth she'd been carrying for far too long, dragging it from room to room, repacking it every time someone told her it was too heavy, too messy, too much. The next day was Thanksgiving. I didn't cook. I didn't drive anywhere. I ordered Chinese, opened a bottle of wine, and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on in the early dark. My phone buzzed again, a new number this time, maybe my mother, maybe Jenna, maybe another attempt at reshaping the story into something that didn't make them look so bad. I didn't answer. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's not a speech, not a fight, not a screaming match at the dinner table, or a dramatic family blowout. Sometimes revenge is silence, intention, and the courage to leave a table that's been feeding you crumbs while expecting your gratitude. Sometimes revenge is walking away and never looking back.